Okay, world history. We're discussing the causes of World War II. And yesterday we had talked about the global depression and how, that should be one, the global depression and how unemployment went up and inflation went up and people's needs were not being met, okay, economically. So people were very unhappy. And they had associated this depression with their first experiments with democracy. Now, it was not because of democracy. They just made that generalization. And because of this, we had the rise of fascism. Okay, fascism is a totalitarian form of government. Okay, so these totalitarians will take over various countries like Francisco Franco in Spain, Hitler in Germany, Mussolini. You had a totalitarian. He wasn't a fascist. He was a communist totalitarian. We studied Stalin over in the Soviet Union. So Europe has very much moved to this totalitarian style, and we have a few holdouts that are democratic. Okay, now when these totalitarians take power, this leads us to the next part leading up to the causes of World War II. Okay, and that is the aggressive nature of these totalitarians. Okay, when I say aggressive, it is the want, the desire for more territory. Okay, with territory comes resources, with territory comes power, etc., etc. In the case of Japan, okay, Japan is a very small island country, and they had industrialized. Okay, they had industrialized and they had militarized. So in order to feed their industry, to keep their economy going, in order to feed the military, they needed resources that their island country could not supply. So they turned toward mainland Asia. Okay, in the early 1900s, they took over the Korean Peninsula. They took over the entire Korean Peninsula. And then they started moving into what is called Manchuria. I'll show you on a map in a minute, which is northern China, okay, in search of these resources. So we have to understand how Japan got there. Let's take a look, okay? Um, Japan falls under military rule, is basically what's going to happen. Okay. In the 1920s, Japan had become more and more democratic, which is a good thing. They signed the Kellogg-Briand Pact, which kind of outlawed war. Said war will not be how we solve our problems. But the underlying problem of Japan is that the Constitution limited the prime minister's power. The prime minister didn't have a lot of power. And on the contrary, military leaders only answered to the emperor. Okay, so Japan is still controlled by an emperor, like a mythical king or whatever. In their eyes, he is a god. Okay, so you have a divide between prime minister and military leaders and answering to the emperor. During the World Depression, when things got bad, right, military leaders gained a lot of support of the people and the country. And militarists uh, made the emperor the symbol of their power, okay, the god. We're doing everything for the emperor. These militarists were extremely nationalistic, right? Country comes first. You see a similarity there between Germany and Italy. And what this is how we're going to see Germany, Italy, Japan team up in World War II. Okay, so again, they needed materials and markets. So Japan, here's Japan, island country, needs resources. I mentioned they first took over the Korean Peninsula, and then once That didn't prove to be enough. They went up in here into northern China, Manchuria, and then started moving their way down here. This was all done in the early 30s, okay? What I need you to note here is that this is the first challenge to the League of Nations. Remember, the League of Nations came out of World War One. The League of Nations was designed to keep peace. It was a committee of all the countries in the world trying to solve the problems so it did not lead to war. All right. The only problem is Japan used military force to invade sovereign countries and take it. And the League of Nations was like, oh, well, what are we going to do? Are we going to use war to stop war? They were kind of like a dog that is all bark and no bite. They didn't have an answer for it. Okay, so the League of Nations goes challenged. Japan challenges, and nothing happens but a slap on the wrist. Okay, that's in 31. In 1933, Japan actually withdraws from the League of Nations and say, you know what, we don't need to be part of this. Okay. By 1937, this is just 2 years before World War II breaks out, Japan and China are in a full out war because China's, like, get out of our country. Okay. Meanwhile, in Europe, the other authoritarians, the other fascists here, see that Japan, nothing happened to Japan for invading China. So they figure, hey, we might as well as also. Italy, under Mussolini, decides that, hey, we're going to take Ethiopia. Now, if you remember back to Ethiopia, it was one of the only countries to remain independent during imperialism. And that's because they fought off the Italians. So Mussolini gets it in his head that, we're gonna go take Ethiopia. So now we're a big power, yada yada yada. This is the second when Italy invades Ethiopia in 1935. This is the second challenge to the League of Nations. And the League of Nations doesn't have an answer. Okay, what they start practicing is this policy called appeasement. Appeasement. That means giving in to an aggressor in order to keep peace. Why? Because the last thing they wanted was war. Well, unfortunately, this isn't going to work because as Japan invades China and Mussolini invades Ethiopia, you got Hitler who's about to come to power, and he's watching all this unfold, and he says, well, I got to get some too. Okay? In 1935, don't forget, we're in the middle of this worldwide depression, right? So Hitler wants to put his people back to work. Hitler announces that he will not obey the Treaty of Versailles. Okay, the treaty that ended World War One. Hitler says, yeah, no more. That is the third direct challenge to the League of Nations, and nothing is done. In 1936, Hitler moves troops into the Rhineland, which is this area right here, part of which they lost in World War One. Hitler's starting to feel powerful. He's got the support of the people. He reaches out to Mussolini, and we have what's called the Rome-Berlin Axis. It is a treaty between these two fascist dictators. A month later, Japan jumps in, and we have the creation of the Axis powers. Germany, Italy, and Japan will all be allies. They are also coincidentally the three countries that were left most upset, most resentful after World War One. See how that happens? The Treaty of Versailles was so unfair, it almost created this. The next thing Hitler does is he sends troops into Austria because that was his home country. He wants to unite all the Germanic peoples. Again, the League of Nations is still practicing appeasement. They're slapping Hitler on the wrist and saying, "Bad Hitler," but nothing is being done. Okay, if we give you this, will you stop? In 1938, Hitler demands the Sudetenland. That is this little part right here of Czechoslovakia. Why? Because it has Germanic peoples in it. And this is when the the former allies, Great Britain and France, kind of say, hey, something's got to be done here. He's not stopping. So they have the Munich Conference. And with that, they practice appeasement again. They say, all right, Hitler, if we give you the Sudetenland, do you promise to stop taking land? And he says, yes, of course he does. 6 months later, he takes all of Czechoslovakia. Okay. In 1939, Hitler and Stalin sign a non aggression pact. Look, Hitler did not like Stalin. Stalin did not like Hitler. Neither of them trusted each other. But they thought if they made an alliance, Hitler's plan was just to hold off the Soviet Union as long as possible. In that, they had promised to split Poland. The Soviet Union could get back some of the land it lost. Anyways, as you know from the video that we watched on Stalin, Hitler will backstab him. Okay, so this is the aggressive nature. And then there is, of course, Spain over here on the map. Until 1931, Spain had been a monarchy by a king, right? They experiment with democracy here. A republic was declared. And then Francisco Franco emerges and basically begins a civil war, a revolt, a fascist style government. Okay, we have the Spanish Civil War, 1936 to 1939. Of course, all the fascist brothers of Europe unite. You got Hitler here, you got Mussolini here, and they see their fascist buddy Francisco Franco in the fight for fascism in the Civil War, so they send aid. They send troops, they send bombers. This is a famous painting called Guernica by Pablo Picasso on the destruction done on one particular small town by Hitler's Luftwaffe, which is the Air Force. Okay, so we have the rise of fascism and the aggressive nature leading us into the causes of World War II. We'll stop there.